Grandmind Velixthar existed as a point of serene confluence within the weave. For 700 of its 953 standard years of life, it had been the fulcrum upon which the unified telepathic council of the Altheny balanced. The weave was the Altheny, a boundless, silent ocean of shared consciousness, where thoughts, emotions, and memories flowed as gentle currents between every member of their species. Individuality was a concept they understood only academically, like a primitive mathematical theorem long since superseded by a more elegant, integrated whole. To be Altheny was to be part of the weave. To be separate was to be nothing. Here, aboard the Concordance platform, the weave was at its most placid. The station itself was a testament to Altheny philosophy, grown from a single crystalline seed over millennia into a lattice of pearlescent, flowing structures. Light was not generated, but guided, channeled through the very walls from a nearby star, softened and diffused until it filled every chamber with a gentle, eternal dawn. There were no hard edges, no discordant sounds, only the soft, resonant hum of the station's life-sustaining processes and the vast, peaceful symphony of a billion minds in harmony. Velixthar focused a sliver of its awareness on its two companions in the grand chamber. To its left, metaphorically, floated the consciousness of Lyraxis. Young, at only 2 centuries old, her mental signature was a vibrant tapestry of curiosity, shimmering with hues of eager anticipation that Velixthar had not felt within itself for eons. To its right was Zor-El, the Council's designated skeptic, his mind a cool, steady monolith of caution. His role was to perceive potential dissonance, to analyze threats before they could ripple the great quiet. "They are late," projected Zor-El, his thought a smooth, polished river stone in the flow of the weave. The agreed-upon chronometric alignment passed 7 of their designated minutes ago. Patience, skeptic Lyraxis countered, her thought a playful, sparkling eddy. "Their mode of travel is energetic, brutish. To traverse the void by igniting controlled chemical explosions is a sign of a nascent, yet determined, intellect. A degree of temporal inaccuracy is to be expected." Velixthar allowed a calming current to wash over them both. "They are coming. The dissonant vibrations of their vessel approach. It is not our way to judge a new consciousness by its punctuality, but by the quality of its thought. Prepare yourselves. This is the culmination of 100 years of observation." The Altheny had first detected humanity not through a ship or a probe, but through a faint, chaotic leakage of electromagnetic radiation. It was a cacophony of noise, a jumble of entertainment signals, primitive communications, and the ghostly echoes of long-dead broadcasts. It was utterly unlike the focused, intentional psionic beacons used by every other spacefaring race they had encountered. For decades, the Council had debated the nature of the source. Was it a natural stellar phenomenon, a bizarre, mindless ecosystem of competing signals? The truth, when they finally deciphered it, was stranger still. It was a civilization, a loud, boisterous, and profoundly lonely civilization, shouting into the darkness with no idea if anyone was listening. A species of individuals, each a tiny, clamoring radio station, creating a planetary din of such complexity it bordered on pure static. Yet, from that static, patterns emerged. Mathematics, physics, art of breathtaking emotional range, from heart-wrenching symphonies to guttural, aggressive rhythms. Philosophies that espoused both universal compassion and naked self-interest. They were a species of profound, jarring contradictions. After 50 years of passive listening, the Council had sent a single, gentle psionic pulse, a simple mathematical greeting, the universal language of intelligent life. The human response had been startlingly fast. They hadn't replied with psionics, of which they seemed to have no collective grasp. Instead, they had analyzed the carrier wave, triangulated the origin point with unnerving precision, and sent a physical probe. And then, a ship. A real, crude ship. It now hung in orbit beyond the Concordance platform, a thing of sharp angles and scorched metal plating that Zor-El's mind described as a brutalist scar upon the void. "It is docking," Velixthar projected. "The outer seals are cycling. The atmospheric exchange is complete. They have accepted our offering of a breathable environment. Their biological readings are agitated," Zor-El noted. "Heart rate elevated. A cocktail of complex hormones floods their system. Stress, anxiety, fear. As would be expected, Lyraxis offered, a touch of empathy warming her thought. Imagine being one, alone, walking into the heart of the many. The pressure must be immense. The great, iridescent iris that served as the chamber's entrance dilated. Soft light spilled into the docking corridor beyond, illuminating the figure who stood there. The Althany had, of course, reviewed the data packets the humans had sent. They knew the basic humanoid form, but data was a sterile thing. Reality was different. The being, their designated diplomat, Dr. Eris Thorne, was a biped of medium height. His cranial hair was a chaotic, dark mass. The fabric covering his body, a deep gray, was wrinkled and bore a dark, ominous stain near the collar. He held a ceramic vessel in one hand from which a thin plume of steam arose, and he brought it to his lips, sipping from it as he surveyed the grand chamber. The chamber was designed to inspire tranquility. Its vast, domed ceiling swirled with the soft light of a captured nebula, and the floor was a seamless expanse of warm, yielding crystal. In the center, three gently pulsing light forms represented the physical loci of Velixthar, Lyraxis, and Zor-El. There were no chairs, no tables, no clutter of any kind. It was a space for minds to meet, unburdened by physical trivialities. Dr. Thorne blinked, his eyes moving, scanning, darting from the ceiling to the floor to the light forms. His mind, from the Althany perspective, was a fortress. Unlike the open, flowing consciousness of their own kind, his was a roaring, shielded furnace. They could feel the heat of it, the raw, chaotic energy roiling behind a wall of solid psychic noise, but they could not read a single coherent thought. It was like trying to discern a whisper next to a star. He took another sip from his mug. The scent that wafted from it was acrid, bitter. A chemical signature their sensors flagged as a mild neurotoxin. He poisons himself, Zor-El projected, the thought sharp with alarm. Is this a ritual of self-harm? A display of fortitude? Perhaps it is a focusing agent, Lyraxis suggested, though her own mental color was tinged with confusion. Their biology is predicated on internal chemical reactions of a violent nature. It might be a way to stabilize his thought processes. The human cleared his throat. The sound, a wet, guttural rasp, was jarring in the perfect stillness of the chamber. "Greetings," he said. His voice, transmitted through a small device on his collar that translated his barking language into the pure mathematical concepts the Althany could understand, was deeper than they expected. "I'm Dr. Eris Thorne. I represent the United Nations of Earth. I gotta say, you folks have some prime real estate here. The decor is very calming, minimalist. I like it." He gestured with his mug. "Sorry about this," he said, indicating the vessel. "It's coffee, long haul, helps me keep the all hamster on the wheel, if you know what I mean." The Althany did not know what he meant. The weave hummed with 1,000 silent queries. A hamster. A wheel, a primitive energy generation method. A metaphor for cyclical futility. Velixthar projected the formal greeting they had prepared. A complex and beautiful waveform of welcome, peace, and the promise of mutual understanding. It flowed from their loci into the translator, which rendered it into Thorne's language. Thorne listened, nodding slowly. His expression was placid, almost bored. "Right. Likewise," he said when the greeting was finished. "So where do we start? You guys have questions, I have questions. My main one, for the record, is where the restroom is. But we can shelve that for now. You go first." The sheer, staggering casualness of the creature was breathtaking. Generations of protocol, of careful, deliberate first contact procedures honed over countless encounters with nascent species, had not prepared them for this. He behaved not like an envoy standing before a civilization a million years his senior, but like a man waiting for a bus. The stain on his garment, Zor-El noted, his focus narrowing. "Our analysis indicates it is the same substance he is consuming. He is careless, untidy. This is not the presentation of a being holding its counterpart in high esteem, or perhaps their culture places no value on such aesthetics," Lyraxis mused. "Perhaps authenticity is their highest virtue. He presents himself as he is, without artifice." A dangerous assumption, Zor-El countered. "Artifice is a tool. A being without it is either a simpleton or something so confident it feels no need to conceal its nature." Velixthar steered the conversation back to the diplomatic track, dampening the internal debate. You are humanity's chosen representative, the voice of your people. Tell us of your species' philosophy. What drives you? What is the core tenet of your existence? Thorn took a long, slow sip of his coffee, his eyes half-lidded. He seemed to ponder the question, or perhaps he was just savoring the bitter liquid. Finally, he lowered the mug and gave a small, wry smile. That's the big one, huh? Straight for the jugular. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. The core tenet. Well, if you ask our poets, they'll say it's love. If you ask our governments, they'll say it's progress. If you ask our corporations, they'll say it's profit. He paused, his gaze becoming distant. But if you want the real, honest-to-God truth, the thing that sits under all of that, it's survival, simple as that. Everything else is just marketing. The concept of survival was not alien to the Althani. Their own ancestors, gentle herd creatures on a world of savage predators, had survived. But they had survived through harmony, through community, through becoming one entity so vast the predator could not harm the whole. Survival was a passive state, a condition of being. For this human, it sounded like an active, ongoing struggle. Survival implies a threat, Zor-El observed, his thought a sharp, cold spike. What is it that you struggle to survive against? Thorn's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everything, he said, his voice soft. The universe, for starters, it's a remarkably hostile place. Cold, empty, full of radiation and things that explode. Then there's our own planet. It tries to kill us with storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, and a whole menagerie of microscopic things that want to eat us from the inside out. Then, of course, for most of our history, our biggest threat was each other. Recoiled, her mental form flickering. You prey upon yourselves. Oh yeah, big time, Thorn said with unnerving cheerfulness. We're fantastically good at it, got it down to a science. But we're mostly past that now. Mostly. We've managed to sublimate the impulse. We channel it into more productive areas. Economics, sports, reality television. You know, civilized stuff. The word sublimate hung in the weave. It implied not removal but redirection. The impulse was still there, waiting. Velixthar felt a deep, foundational tremor of unease. All their previous first contacts had been with species who had evolved past internal conflict, who had achieved a state of planetary harmony before reaching for the stars. It was considered a prerequisite, a great filter that weeded out species too self-destructive to survive their own technological adolescence. Humanity seemed to have slipped through the cracks, or perhaps smashed their way through the filter with brute force. You speak of threats, Velixthar projected, its thought carefully measured. Your world, you said, had other creatures. Things that hunted you. Absolutely, Thorn nodded enthusiastically. Ancient history, but it's baked right into our DNA. We spent a few million years as terrified little proto-monkeys hiding in trees. Everything wanted to eat us. Big cats with teeth like daggers, giant bears, massive snakes. We were prey. A wave of something akin to recognition washed through the weave. Here at last was common ground. Lyraxis felt a surge of empathy. They understood this. They were a prey species too. Their entire civilization was built on the memory of hiding from the shadow of the hunter. They are like us, she projected, a soft, hopeful chime. They understand the fear. They understand the need for unity in the face of the predator. Thorn took another sip of his coffee. Yep, we were prey, he repeated, setting the mug down on the crystalline floor with a soft clink. For a while, anyway. Then we figured out a few things. Fire, sharp sticks, working together, and then we weren't prey anymore. He looked up, and for the first time his gaze was not casual or bored. It was sharp, focused, and held a glint that sent a shiver of pure, cold dread through the weave. Then we became the thing the monsters have nightmares about. The silence in the chamber was no longer placid. It was a vacuum, heavy and absolute. The gentle hum of the weave had ceased. A billion minds held their collective breath. Zor-El's thought was a sliver of ice. What are you? Thorn shrugged, the casual demeanor returning, but it felt different now. It felt like a mask. We're human, he said, as if that explained everything. We're the persistence hunters, the things that don't give up. The things that will chase a bigger, stronger, faster animal for days under the hot sun until it just falls over from exhaustion. We're not the strongest things on our planet. We're not the fastest. We're just the smartest and the meanest." He gestured around the serene chamber. "You guys, you built all this. It's incredible. It's elegant, peaceful. You evolved to achieve harmony. We evolved to win. It's a different design philosophy." Velixthar felt an urgent, desperate need to understand the mind behind those words. The contradiction was too vast. A being who spoke of being a monster, but presented no overt threat. A species that reveled in its predatory past, but built societies based on cooperation. The psychic wall around Thorne's mind was no longer just a curiosity. It was a challenge, a lock that had to be opened. The survival of the Altheny could depend on understanding what lay behind it. Gathering a fraction of the Council's immense psionic power, Velixthar focused it into a single, fine point. It was not an attack, but a key. A gentle, probing inquiry designed to slide past the conscious defenses and glean a single, pure impression of the creature's core nature. It was a technique they had used 1,000 times before, a standard diagnostic tool. The probe moved forward, touching the surface of Thorne's mental shield, and the universe broke. It was not a wall that Velixthar encountered. A wall is a static, solid thing. This was a storm, a maelstrom of pure, untamed chaos. For a microsecond, the probe breached the outer layer and the grandmind was deluged. It was not thought, it was pre-thought. A boiling, primordial soup of raw, weaponized instinct. There were flashes of red-toothed rage, the savage joy of a successful hunt, the icy terror of being hunted in turn. There were shrieks of fear so profound they were indistinguishable from battle cries. There was the gnawing, relentless paranoia of an ape scanning the tree line for threats, cross-faded with the abstract anxiety of a looming deadline. There was lust and love and hate and hunger, not as distinct emotions, but as a single, indivisible screaming knot of pure want. Below that was a deeper layer, a cold, reptilian focus, ancient and utterly without pity, concerned with nothing but breath and blood and survival. And layered over all of it, a thin, fragile crust of reason, of logic, of the consciousness that was Dr. Aris Thorne, desperately trying to pilot a machine built for murder through a universe that required paperwork. The weave recoiled in a unified spasm of agony and disbelief. Lyraxis let out a silent, psychic scream, her light form flaring erratically. Zor-El's consciousness contracted into a dense, terrified singularity. Velixthar felt as though it had dipped its hand into the heart of a supernova. It ripped its probe back with a speed born of pure, reflexive horror. The entire event had lasted less than 1,000th of a second. In the physical world, nothing had happened. Dr. Aris Thorne had not even blinked. He simply stood there, his expression unchanged. Then he sighed. It was a weary, tired sound, the sound of a man who had been expecting this all along. He raised his gaze to meet the loci of the 3 council members. "Don't go in there," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of its earlier humor. It was a tone of genuine, almost gentle, warning. "It's not for you. Hell, even we don't go in there if we can help it." He picked up his mug, swirling the dregs of the cold coffee. "You wanted to know our core tenet. You just saw it. That thing you just touched, that's the engine. All the art, the philosophy, the love, the compassion, that's the beautiful car we built around it. But the engine is still there, roaring, always." He looked at his empty mug. "Our brains," he said, tapping his temple with a finger. "Best model we have is that it's a survival machine designed by a committee of mad engineers over millions of years, and it's all held together with duct tape and hope. You've got the old lizard brain, just wants to eat and not be eaten. Then you've got the monkey brain on top of that, obsessed with social status and shiny things. And then, right on top, there's the human brain, the new guy, the one that writes poetry and feels bad about stepping on a bug." He gave a hollow laugh. "And they're all screaming for control of the steering wheel at the same time. Consciousness is just the poor schmuck with the clipboard trying to pretend he's in charge." He looked from one flickering light form to the next. The Altheny were silent, their collective mind a maelstrom of horrified discovery. The weave, once a tranquil sea, was now a raging ocean of a single, unifying color. The deep, violet black of absolute terror. They hadn't been meeting with a philosopher king. They hadn't even been meeting with a barbarian. They had been meeting with a zookeeper. A zookeeper who lived inside the cage with an unknowable beast, and who had, through some monumental act of will, managed to leash it. And the leash was made of little more than poetry and caffeine. The implications were shattering. The Altheny worldview was predicated on the idea that intelligence led to harmony. That sapience was an escape from the brutal calculus of predator and prey. Humanity was living, breathing, starfaring proof that this was a lie. They had not escaped the beast within, they had domesticated it. They had turned it from a simple predator of flesh into a predator of concepts, of resources, of frontiers. They had weaponized their own primal chaos and used it to conquer a world. And now they were looking at the stars. Zor, El was the first to regain a semblance of function. His thought, when it came, was no longer a smooth stone. It was a jagged shard of obsidian. Apex predator. They are an apex predator species that has achieved sapience. No, Velixthar corrected, its own ancient mind reeling, trying to process the sheer, alien horror of what it had witnessed. The concept of an apex predator was known to them. A creature at the top of its food chain. Efficient, deadly, but ultimately simple, driven by hunger. This was something else entirely. They are not apex predators. An apex predator rests when it is fed. It is content. The human mind we touched, it is never content. It is a persistence predator. It does not stop. It does not rest. It hunts not only for sustenance, but for curiosity, for ambition, for sport. It will hunt an idea to the edge of the galaxy just to see if it can. Lyraxis's thought was a faint, trembling whisper. The compassion he spoke of, the art. Was it a lie? No, Velixthar realized, and this was the most terrifying discovery of all. It was not a lie. It is real. It is the tool they use to keep the pack from tearing itself apart. Their empathy is not a universal constant. It is a targeted adaptation. They developed compassion to build stronger hunting parties. Their love is for the pack. Their mercy is for the pack. To those outside the pack, Velixthar did not need to finish the thought. The truth of it settled over the weave like a shroud. To those outside the pack, humanity offered only the cold, relentless calculus of the hunt. Doctor. Aris Thorn watched the three light forms pulse and flicker with erratic, panicked energy. He could almost feel their silent, frantic communication. He'd seen this reaction before in simulations. But the reality was heavier. He felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Pity, regret. He took a deep breath, the air of the station tasting sterile and clean after the recycled air of his ship. "Look," he said, his voice softening. "I get it. This is a lot to take in. We're a lot to take in. We are contradictions. We are capable of the most astonishing acts of kindness and the most unspeakable acts of cruelty, sometimes in the same afternoon. We are the species that cured polio and invented the nuclear bomb. We weep at music and then we go to war. It's all in there. The angel and the ape wrestling in the mud of our subconscious." He ran a hand through his messy hair. "We came here in peace. We mean that. We've learned the hard way that cooperation is a better long-term survival strategy than conquest. It's more efficient. But we need you to understand who you're cooperating with. We don't lie about what we are. Not anymore. Honesty is the only foundation for real trust." Without another word, Velixthar, Lyraxis, and Zor-El simultaneously severed their physical manifestation. The three light forms simply winked out of existence, plunging the grand chamber into the dim, ambient light of the nebular ceiling. The meeting was over. There was no formal farewell, no closing statement. Just an abrupt, absolute absence. It was the most profound statement of dismissal the Altheny were capable of. Aris Thorn stood alone in the vast, silent chamber. The silence was deeper now. Before, it had felt peaceful. Now it felt like the silence of a forest after a gunshot. He let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The diplomatic mask fell away, and his face sagged with an exhaustion that was more than just lack of sleep. It was soul-deep. He had succeeded. He had delivered the message he was sent to deliver. He had established humanity not as a threat, but as a fact. A dangerous, unpredictable, and powerful fact that could not be ignored or trifled with. He had planted a seed of fear, and he knew it was necessary. The galaxy, his strategist had surmised, would not respect a lamb, but it would give a wide berth to a wolf that had learned to quote Shakespeare. He picked up his empty mug. "Well," he muttered to the empty room, "hope they have a decent coffee machine on the ship back." This stuff is cold. He turned and walked out of the chamber, his footsteps the only sound in the silent heart of a terrified civilization. Miles away, in the true core of the Concordance platform, a space that existed more in thought than in physicality, the unified telepathic council convened in emergency session. The weave was a turbulent sea of violet and gray, the colors of fear and confusion. For the first time in recorded history, the great quiet was broken. Quarantine, Zor-El's thoughts slashed through the chaos. Sever all contact. Place a warning beacon on this entire star system. Designate them a Class 1 existential threat. They cannot be allowed to spread. A predatory intelligence is a cancer upon the cosmos. They offered peace, Lyraxis whispered, her thought form still trembling. The being Thorn, he seemed, weary, sad, not malicious, a predator's camouflage, Zor-El retorted. The angler fish does not hate the prey it lures to its death. The human's weariness is the fatigue of a predator that must constantly suppress its own nature. Do you not see? Their peace is a temporary state, a tactic. When it is no longer the most efficient strategy, they will revert to their core programming. And what then? What happens when they decide our worlds have resources they require? What happens when their pack expands to include our territory? Velixthar remained silent, its vast consciousness working to calm the weave, to impose order on the panic. It sifted through the memory of the contact, replaying the terrifying microsecond of the probe, the feel of that roiling, chaotic mind. It analyzed Thorn's words, his posture, his unnerving metaphors. The survival machine, the anxiety engine, the angel and the ape. Finally, the Grand Mind spoke, its thought a deep, powerful current that forced the turbulent psychic waters into a semblance of order. Zor-El is right to be cautious. Lyraxis is right to see the contradiction. You are both seeing parts of the truth, but the whole is more complex and more dangerous. The weave focused on Velixthar's titanic intellect. We have operated under a fundamental misconception, the Grand Mind projected. We believed that intelligence was a force for order. We see now that it is merely a tool. For us, a species of prey, we used it to build harmony, to create a fortress of collective consciousness. For the humans, a species of predator, they used it to become better hunters. Their science, their art, their philosophy, it is all, at its root, a sharpening of the spear. Their societies are not built on a foundation of peace, Velixthar continued. They are built on a foundation of controlled conflict. Their stability is a tense, dynamic equilibrium between their cooperative instincts, the need to strengthen the pack, and their competitive instincts, the need for the individual to dominate. They are a civilization balanced on a knife's edge, and they have been for their entire history. They are comfortable with this chaos. They thrive in it. We are not. The Grand Mind paused, letting the weight of this sink in. We cannot quarantine them. It is too late. They are already among the stars. To declare them an enemy would be to invite a conflict we cannot comprehend. A fight against a creature that does not tire, that thinks in ways we find monstrous, that considers its own internal savagery a source of strength. The Council's threat matrix protocols initiated automatically. A new designation was required. Emergent spacefaring civilization was laughably inadequate. Aggressive expansionist did not capture the psychological horror. Zor-El proposed his term again. Apex predator. Sapient insufficient, Velixthar corrected. We must update the matrix. The new classification for humanity, persistence predator collective, threat level, incalculable. Their potential for aggression is matched only by their potential for cooperation. They are capable of uniting against a common foe with a ferocity we cannot imagine. To fight them would be to become the sole focus of the most dangerous thing the galaxy has ever produced. A new silence fell over the weave. It was not the great quiet of peace, but the frozen, waiting silence of prey that has heard the wolf howl. They understood now. The disheveled clothes were not carelessness. They were a statement that such things were beneath their notice. The caffeine was not a poison. It was fuel for an engine that never idled. The humor was not friendliness. It was a psychological tool of disarmament and observation. It was Lyraxis, her mind filled with a dawning, soul-crushing dread, who posed the final, terrible question. A question that would echo in the weave for millennia to come. defining all future interactions with the loud, chaotic, and terrifying new power in the galaxy. Grandmind. Zor-El, that creature, Dr. Thorne, he was their diplomat. Their thinker, their representative of peace. Her thought trembled, laced with a horror that eclipsed all that had come before. By the great quiet, what then is their soldier?